Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Before I get started, let me see kind of what I've got in the crowd. How many of you know that you advise sponsored student organizations? Okay. Those are organizations that are directly funded by the institution. You get to carry the name Mississippi State University in it. So it might be Tabora, okay, with the Roadrunners, the Center for American Veterans. Now, I've got some risky groups in here, okay? I see Delta Chi, okay, AKA, all right? Greek groups, okay? They're not sponsored by the university, okay? They are registered student organizations, all right? Now, there's a little difference in that because they don't carry necessarily the same risk to the institution. Wrong. They're some of our most risky groups. But what we're going to talk about today is more of physical risk and reputational risk to the institution, okay? The vast majority of you who, particularly if you advise a registered student organization, okay? See Seth? Seth probably represents or advises several of our insurance student organizations or organizations held within the College of Business. Most of those groups hold very little risk to the institution and to themselves. They meet for business meetings to learn how to be insurance agents or enterprising risk management professionals, but they're not out there doing the things that our larger student organizations are. That pose considerable risk to the institution, just like the student association or music makers might be. So for all of you who are new to this, and for those of you who have been being an advisor for many years, don't be utterly scared about risk management and what you hold liable as an advisor. Ideally, we are going to mitigate out most all of your risk in the organizational event planning process, or org sync, okay? And really what we're talking about with regards to student organizational risk management is foreseeability. When I had a conversation with the executive group, did we accurately plan our event, okay? Did we identify and assess the likely possibility of what could happen? Now look, in a business meeting, we can often ensure that there is no risk, okay? Now, fraternities and sororities who are throwing a lot of money at things that are butting up every day with not only university policy but possibly violations of state law, we do have a lot of risk, okay? And so, you know, a lot of things in student affairs, we need pictures, okay? So we have provided these pictures for everybody of how to avoid risk, okay? So we may have a project that we want to do, and sometimes we just simply say, we look at it from lenses and we say, look, we're just going to avoid it. We've looked at this. There's too much liability. There's too much risk. It's too big of a jump from what we're doing day to day to do this. And I'll give you an example. We would not expect a student organization who's never done a concert to all of a sudden be able to rent out the hump and understand all the risks and procedures that are associated with doing a concert in the hump, okay? Both financial risk as well as reputational risk. But we would expect a group to be able to plan and mitigate that by doing something maybe in the amphitheater or in the ballroom and stair-step into that. But we don't think anything about music makers going out and doing that exact same thing multiple times a year. And a lot of that is because of the expertise built in or baked into their risk plan and their institutional knowledge, okay? And what we try to do throughout all of those events is shepherding you through the event process. I have been lucky to approve every event that has happened at the university for the last 10 years. And thank God I am still here. But when I ask a question of you, okay, of your organization, that's not something that that you should take personal, that I don't think that you can't do it. We're simply trying to figure out through the process, have you thought about this particular issue? Some of the biggest issues that we don't talk about very much is the financial implication of holding events at MSU. It is expensive to hold large-scale events at the institution if you don't own your own property, okay? And that's what our risk matrix with regarding our police are, okay? You know, most people probably don't think about every Friday and Saturday night of football games, we close down fraternity and our sorority row, okay? We do that in order to provide life safety inside of our Greek organizations, okay? If we didn't, people would just continue to park there until we couldn't get ambulances inside of it. And that's something that we had to learn along the way. So we try to mitigate our risk through foreseeability, mainly inside of the event form. The event form in itself, if you take the time to actually look at it, is going to mitigate out most all of your university risk, okay? Because it is grounded in university policy. Now look, I'm not dumb enough to think that people don't always tell the truth on that. And that is where sometimes student organizations run the risk of violations of the code of conduct that we'll talk about in a little bit, or other university policies. Obviously, the best way, and we learned this from our Greek organizations, is to transfer risk, okay? Again, this probably affects maybe out of our 300 plus, 400 plus student organizations, this probably is in the realm of 60, okay, where they transfer risk from their own property or the university to somewhere else, okay? We think about that a lot with our Greek student organizations. And sometimes, y'all, we collectively as the institution are going to accept that risk and we're going to move forward. And we're going to move forward with that with a great game plan of how we can mitigate out as much absolute risk as we can, and then accept that and move forward with a great event. And a classic example of that is next Friday with Bulldog Bash. Okay? We're going to have the largest free outdoor concert in the state of Mississippi. And it is inherently wrought with risk. Okay? Personal risk, financial risk. My God, what if the band doesn't show up? Reputational risk. And we have accepted that, and we move forward with it. And that's what we're really talking about. Having the ability for you as advisors to ask the right questions. You know, I think of it a lot of the way my dad used to ask me questions. I used to say, I wonder how he knows that. You know, y'all have life experiences that our 18 to 22-year-olds do not. And simply challenging them and supporting them is typically enough. Contracts, waivers, and agreements. If you've noticed over the last few years, we have worked very diligently to remove Mississippi State from some of our organizations' names, okay? And that is a conscious effort that most of our organizations are actually hosted by Mississippi State. You're not a part of Mississippi State. And so unless your funds are directly tied to the institution, then, and you are a sponsored organization, you will hold Mississippi State University. And the classic example is the Mississippi State University Student Association. Another example is, and they are exactly right, and I'm going to pick on the Presbyterians for a second. Their group will be called CCO of First Presbyterian at Mississippi State University, because our student organizations do not get the power to speak for Mississippi State. Similarly, Mississippi State does not engage in active contracts with outside vendors through student organizations outside of sponsored ones. And I'm looking at Mr. Buffin right here because for years he gets to sign all the contracts for the university. So he's probably the only guy who's more risky than I am about what they put their name onto. Make sure when you're engaging third-party vendors that you're clear that is between your student group and the vendor, and that Mississippi State University and IHL are not responsible for those particular actions. And we have a good way of working through that with the institution. Waivers. At any time that the university feels that the risk of your organization is such, we will require a waiver of release of liability. And that is, as valuable as that piece of paper probably is, but we are still going to require it. If something goes bad, the university is most likely going to be enjoined in a level of litigation, and we understand that. We have 3 fabulous attorneys who are prepared to deal with that, and a lot of the big-ticket items that we run through in a given year, okay, are run through our university council. I say that because that's maybe 5 to 6 student organizations that would ever be affected by that. The vast majority of our student groups are really probably on such a small legal scale, legal liability scale, but I always get this question: what am I liable for as a student advisor, as a faculty advisor? And if you're complying with university policy and the laws of the state of Mississippi, probably not much, okay? We do see more in Greek life of advisors being named in hazing events or alcohol events that happen on and off of our property. But usually you have an advisor who's smart enough to oppose that, and they still go out and do it behind their back. And usually the advisor is one of the first people who is removed from that lawsuit. Those of us who work for the institution and have advising inside of our contracts or our job descriptions probably hold more liability than you who are just advising a spiritual organization or an honorary. But if you feel at any time that you are holding some liability, you want to ask about it, by all means, call me in the Dean of Students office and we'll talk about it. And if I can't answer your question, I'll get you to the attorneys, and the attorneys absolutely can. Intramurals, traveling, alcohol, sexual misconduct, large-scale events. Almost in every time of this. Now, I don't see, intramurals are inherently risky. They are, just because we had a young man break a leg last night. You know, of no way that we could have mitigated that risk out. Life just happens, okay? But our student organizations involved in intramural sports are highly advised by our University Recreation Center, but they hold a significant amount of risk. In fact, in some institutions have been graded out as high as our Greek organizations. I don't see that in the group, so I'm going to move past that. Travel. Travel is always a risky thing, because when you travel as a student organization, okay, particularly a sponsored student organization, you're traveling with, as Mississippi State, you're representing our institution, and the code of conduct follows you along with you. And in particular, it's what I'm going to talk about with regards to the Clery Act. So if there are violations of university policy at your sponsored university trip, the university needs to know about that so that we can address that behavior similarly to the way we would on on-campus events. And if they are traveling with university funds, they need to go through the university travel process. Okay? If they are traveling without university funds in a university a registered student organization, we would ask that you do best practices, okay? That they not drive more than 6 to 8 hours in a day, that they carpool, that they caravan, that you know where they're going to be, that they have a rally point, okay? We never think about this, but we actually had students in London when the subway bombings went off in London, and we had a rally point for our student organization, and everybody was safe. But you think about it. When you take a young man from Winona, Mississippi, and you deposit them in a big city for the first time, it is different than what they're used to here at Mississippi State University or New York City or San Antonio or wherever they are. And you need to expect and explain at minimum general guidelines for their behavior away from MSU. And the minimum of that should be the code of conduct. Minors. Anytime that I have an idea that you're going to have minors with you, you're going to get a lot of questions. Okay? Now, the way we transfer some of that risk to the university is, and I have a group right now who is mentoring young men and women at Sudduth Elementary right now. When we move them to Sudduth, they are on the Consolidated School District's concern. They're still our students, but we've transferred that. When they are here at Mississippi State, you will have to comply with our minors on campus policy, which is significant. And should you put that in your event form, you're going to get contacted by myself and Joy Graves in the Office of Compliance and Integrity, and we're going to work through the minors on campus policy. It is the right way to do it. It is more important than ever that we protect our minors when they are on Mississippi State University campus. And almost always when they are on campus, we're going to expect their teachers or their parents, ideally, to be with them. And if you have students who are have minors on campus, it's a laundry list of things to do, including background checks. Hazing. Let me be clear. Hazing is prohibited by the institution. It is also a violation of state law. And we have gone through great lengths over the last 2 years to expand our definition of hazing and to be attuned to identifying and sanctioning groups who would engage in hazing. Hazing is always, irregardless of place, prohibited. Fire and life safety, particularly a residence hall or a Greek life housing issue, but that's really more to do with us having the state fire marshal here yearly to abide by that. Sexual abuse and sexual harassment. Y'all are all aware of our sexual misconduct policy at the institution and that it follows you regardless of where you are. Okay? As long as you're a student at MSU, you can be held accountable under the sexual misconduct policy, particularly in student traveling. And should you become made aware of that, and particularly as I talk about our next session, you need to report that to the institution, okay? Most often, if you go back to your SAVE training that you should be doing right now, there's always the ability to do that where the student decides to report that anonymously or in confidence through our helpline and through our student counseling center. Student travel, particularly as coeducational units and sexual misconduct, are very hot topics that if you are traveling, I wish you would let us know so that we can really spend some time regarding best practice with that. Large-scale events. Again, we're going to mitigate most of that out through the event process. However, if you're going to do a large event, 500 people plus, on our university campus, there's going to be a significant cost of doing business with that, okay? We're going to make sure that you have adequate number of police, adequate number of training yes, I know I'm running over, adequate number of parking attendants, etc., that we can ensure that your event is going to be safe at Mississippi State University.